Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our legislative coffees. We're so excited to have you here. We're waiting on a couple more legislators, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So just to let you know, we did invite every single legislator that has constituents in Johnson County, as we do every year. We're going to go ahead and just jump into intros because I know nobody wants to hear from me, but I do want to thank you again for giving up your Saturday morning on behalf of Johnson County Library and the League of Women Voters. Also, I always forget to introduce myself. I am Ashley Fick. I am your moderator for the day, and I'm so excited to have you here. So with that, I'm going to let either Representative Parker or Representative Woodard fight over who wants to go first and give a little bit of info about their districts and what they want you to know about what's going on in Topeka today.
I guess Brandon has decided that I will start. Then since he is in leadership, I will defer to his judgment. I'm Representative Brett Parker. I represent the 29th House District, which is basically central Overland Park, roughly 95th to 127th in between Metcalf and Schweitzer. This is my third term, so I'm in my fifth year now. Lots happening in the legislature. I'm looking forward to questions on all of it. I'll just be very brief. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, which is the big budget committee in the House. We just put together the first draft of the budget in committee up until about 7:30 at night on Thursday. So that's kicked out of committee now, and we'll deal with that as the whole House probably next week. I serve as the ranking Democrat on the Health and Human Services Committee. We've been dealing with issues around telehealth, specifically around pandemic. A lot of legislation kind of got backed up in that committee for a few years as they were afraid to pass much because there wasn't much of an appetite to have health bills that might be amendable to Medicaid expansion. We're kicking out a few more bills this year. So it's been fun to dig into some of that policy. I am on the Elections Committee, where we've been doing a bit of work on the House side. Not a whole lot has happened on the Senate side. So right now we're kind of waiting for them to send us more things to do. One of the big focuses for me there has just been protecting the access to vote that we have in Kansas. We have a really good absentee balloting system. In fact, one that a lot of other states are looking to emulate. So making sure that we protect access to voting in Kansas and keep some of those best practices that we have in place. And lastly, I serve on the House Insurance Committee, which Representative Woodard has heard me remark on many times. Not always the most thrilling legislation that comes through there. I can assure you that we've passed very many technical cleanup bills through that committee after hours and hours of hearings. And I look forward to answering questions from all of you, and I'll give Representative Woodard a chance to give his intro.
Well, thank you, Brett, and thank you to the Johnson County Libraries and League of Women Voters for hosting this. This is always one of my favorite events, and I'm bummed that we can't do it in person, but hopefully by this time next year, we're going to be able to be back at the libraries and having these in person. I'm Representative Brandon Woodard. I represent District 30 in the Kansas House, which is Lenexa and Olathe, everything between Renner and Flum, from 87th down to 127th Street. I'm in my second term, so this is my third legislative session, and by far the busiest of the three so far. I am serving, as Brett mentioned, in the House leadership. I'm the House Minority Agenda Chair, a job that apparently he didn't want again, so I ran for it. So I run our morning caucus meetings when we go over bill briefs and decide how the caucus is going to vote before our floor debates. I'm also on, I've remained on House Federal and State Affairs, so any issue that you usually read in the headlines that's controversial, we see those in Fed and State. So guns, God, gays, gambling, alcohol, abortion. This week we had the sports wagering bill. Next week we have medicinal marijuana. So all the fun issues go through there. I'm also still the ranking Democrat on the Higher Education Budget Committee. So we've got our work cut out there, and we can talk more about that if people have questions, but a lot of changes will still be coming to the budget because of the American Rescue Plan passed by the federal government. So we've done all sorts of budget work that we've all in our subcommittees sent out to Brett and everyone on the Appropriations Committee, and now we get to start it all over again and go back through the process. So we'll see how that goes. And then I'm no longer on the House Insurance Committee. I'm not super sad about it. But I have joined the House Tax Committee, which meets every day at 3:30. So if you want to learn about taxes, I'm becoming your guy. We never get out of there before 5 o'clock. So it's certainly fun to be on one of the busier committees, and we haven't slowed down. I look forward to your questions, and I just want to thank you all for being here and look forward to the conversation.
Representative Hoye, do you need a moment or are you ready to give your intro? 3 minutes.
I'm ready.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, a little. We ordered in Black Dog this morning, so and it took a little while. So just getting into our breakfast. I'm Representative JoElla Hoye, District 17, Lenexa, Shawnee, Lake Quivira, and I'm sure everyone's let you know it's been a wild session, and we're all getting ready to have the last couple busy weeks before we recess in April. I serve on Federal and State Affairs Committee, Children and Seniors, and K through 12 education. And a lot of big things are coming our way with those, especially the K through 12 education budget. And I do have some really big concern about the attempts to pass vouchers and put our budget into a really big bill that what they try to do is put it into a big bill that rolled back a lot of funding for our schools. So we still need to hear from our constituents about how important our public schools are. And on Monday, there's going to be another attempt to make a big scene about we need to open schools, we need to open up. But as we all know, schools are open. We're starting really to have a big turning point in COVID. I felt it when we were all able to get back on the floor together this week. And so if everyone can just hang in there and work together, we're really starting to turn the tide on this. And I have hope that we're going to be on the other side very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Are we ready for our first question? I think so. Are you in favor of nonpartisan independent redistricting commission? Why or why not?
I'm going to jump out on this one. I am very much in favor of that. In fact, in my 3 terms in the House, I filed a constitutional amendment each term to create a nonpartisan independent redistricting committee. But we'll say there's not a lot of appetite for that in the Kansas House, or at least there hasn't been for 5 years here. So I would expect the normal redistricting process where legislators get to draw their own districts. We are waiting on the census data that was kind of backed up by the previous presidential administration. So none of that work will really happen until we're out of session this year. It's possible there's an interim committee that will meet in the fall to get started, but most of that work will happen next spring. But I'm guessing it will play out in a way that will make me like independent commissions even more than I currently do now. But fingers crossed that we can get a really fair bipartisan process through that.
I'll just echo him. Politicians shouldn't be able to pick their voters. Voters should be able to pick their elected officials. So I would be absolutely in support of it.
I definitely think that folks who look at the data and draw maps should be the ones drawing the maps. They're going to be able to look at the demographics and see who is how best to distribute the populations and make it fair. And so I'm all supportive of the geographical folks giving us the lead instead of, as others said, letting the lawmakers draw the maps.
Right. What do you think the priorities should be for the federal stimulus funds when they are received by the state?
I'll jump in on this one too. We are in this weird position with the Kansas budget where when COVID hit, we expected our revenues to go down pretty drastically. They did go down, maybe not quite as severely as we expected, but a lot of agencies took cuts. We had almost an across the board 5% cut just to make the budget balance. Now we're in this unique position where we're on our 3rd federal relief bill, and there have been different stipulations about how the money can be spent. So in some cases, you have funds going directly to school districts. That's great. We can't or shouldn't mess with that. The legislature sometimes tries to work around those rules, but I think the federal legislation was written in a way that will allow those, local authorities to use their funds as best they can. There are some other restrictions too to be watching out for. We can't just take the money that comes from the federal government and choose not to support our agencies and turn around and cut taxes for corporations or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't folks who aren't trying to do that anyway. And we could get ourselves in a lot of trouble as the state of Kansas if we start skirting those rules, where we would actually have to pay back hundreds of millions of dollars to the federal government. And if we think our budget challenge is tough now, it will be much tougher then. So I think making sure that schools are safely reopening and have the resources they need is a giant priority. For me, I think making sure that our higher education institutes are getting the funds that they need as well, and making sure that we are taking care of the health of Kansans. One of the things that is not yet been taken advantage of is due to federal legislation. Passing Medicaid expansion would bring up to $450 million extra into the state of Kansas, which we could spend on any priority that we want. That would not be earmarked. So it could be further spent on healthcare. We could spend it to help fund other agencies, but that would be a great use of federal funds as well.
I always look to see if anyone else unmutes, so I'll go. I'll just speak. I would again echo what Brett said. For higher education, it's specifically under the governor's budget recommendation, there was a 5.3% cut to the universities, and that is one of the largest cuts to higher ed in the history of the state. We know that this governor supports education, and the budget was incredibly tight. 21 state agencies were hit harder than higher education. But luckily, we're watching that go through the process. It is just a budget recommendation. The House and Senate have different positions on restoring some of that funding, but I think we'll get close. I think their ask right now is just, hey, we're not asking for more money. We would just like you to not cut our funds. If you could keep us flat where we were last year, that would be really helpful. And then, of course, they're getting some resources from the American Rescue Plan as well. But half of that goes to students. The other half goes to continuing to provide the PPE and other things necessary to make sure that they can still be learning. But I do want to hit the point too that Representative Hoye made as well, which is, and Representative Parker too, we've got to get students back in the classroom safely when it's possible and our teachers back. That goes for higher ed too. But I do want to debunk this myth that we're hearing from some of the opposition in Topeka that we've got to open everything. Kids are learning, teachers are teaching, students are on campuses or we're learning virtually. It's happening. They're all working together to make this possible. So if we can stick together and use those resources, we're going to get back to normal sooner rather than later.
Agreed with all of those points. And the second round of funding that we've received is a little more flexible, recognizing that the needs are going to change as we start coming on the other side of the pandemic. Originally, we need a lot of PPE and safety retrofits, and I really do feel like we have the funding we need to help our schools continue to be able to meet the safety needs. So that flexibility is good. As mentioned earlier, there have been some attempts in our K-12 budget committee to try to use the funding to fund budget enhancements and just basic budget line items, and that is not the intent of these funds. So we need to really make sure that we're using them within the parameters of these funds. And the federal government did put in a maintenance of effort so that we had to meet the same, average of funding in the last 3 years in order to keep states from trying to use it just for one line items, especially because those aren't usually one-time expenses. So we really do need to be responsible with how we allocate these funds and use them directly related to COVID instead of trying to stick other stuff in. It's not money that we can just use to meet our basic budget needs. It is directly related to COVID. So I will keep making sure we prioritize that. And I think we do. I think we're gonna that the funding that we're getting is really gonna help. And as far as looking toward the future, I hope we can try to find projects that'll help us build, you know, we've talked about the broadband and all those sort of building out on transportation. And I think there's going to be some opportunities for that. But right now it's really focusing directly on COVID related expenditures.
Ashley, you're muted.
He's trying to use the spacebar trick. Please update where things stand with the higher education budget. I know that Representative Woodard spoke a little bit about that, but a little bit more specifics would be helpful.
Yeah, so kind of back a little bit, before Governor Kelly's administration, we had seen about 9 consecutive cuts to higher education, either through outright cuts where they were just reduced in the budget, or we would see allotments, which was, you know, the state was in a position financially with the previous administration where you have to have a balanced budget. So if there are times where your expenses are exceeding your revenues, the governor has to make allotments. And so that sounds like they're giving you money, but actually they're allocating you another cut mid-year and basically asking for you to give money back to the state. So they already went through 9 of those. The first year that I was in Topeka in 2019, it was also the first year under Governor Kelly's budget process and budget director. They did restore some funding. I can't remember the exact number, but because of that restoration, they were able to hold tuition flat at all of the Board of Regents universities. And then last year, I think we added an additional 15 or so million. Almost all of the universities kept tuition flat once again. They felt like raising tuition in the middle of a pandemic was not the vibe, and so they kept it where it was. This year, because the 5.3% recommended cut from the governor's office, that was a huge hit to them. And we've heard from all of the universities who have come before the committee. They're all going through programmatic reviews. They're looking at what programs can we consolidate. I know specifically at KU, because I work there, there's an art education program that they have discontinued, but they're still able to have students dual enroll in both visual art and education, right? And so it was one of those programs that was a duplication where they could still offer that service and have it together. I'm seeing the 1-minute mark, so I'll speed it up. And then, so this year, we're still going through the appropriations process. The Senate has their position on higher education. The House has a rather complicated one that hopefully we can fix later down the road. And so that will have to get ironed out in conference committee and negotiations, because of course the budget must be identical and passed by both the Senate and the House and get the governor's signature. Way more to come. We'll see what we get from the federal resources, and then go back through the process. And we're still a long way from whatever the final product is. The Republican, the majority, has realized they don't have 84 votes in the House to override the governor to force a budget so far. And so that likely means they have to pass a budget that gets 63 votes in the House, 21 votes in the Senate, and the governor's signature. So we may be needing to pack our bags until June, but we don't get paid much, but we are paid by the day. Let's do the work. Thanks.
What can be done to hold GOP leadership accountable for fleeing the police? Does this violate ethics rules?
Could you repeat that? My computer I couldn't hear it. Thank you.
What can be done to hold GOP leadership accountable for fleeing the police? Does this violate ethics rules?
All right. I think if you've heard some of the comments from other Senate Republicans, there's a decent chance that the Senate Republican caucus may hold Majority Leader Suellentrop responsible for his actions. If you all did hear, he's alleged to have been driving under the influence the wrong way down I-70 for 10 minutes and nearly hitting at least 3 people who called in to 911. There's still a chance that the charges can be refiled in Shawnee County, so we're watching that. But I'll just say anecdotally from what I've heard in the hall, and then also read quotes in the newspapers, that his own colleagues in the Senate and even in the Republican caucus are very unhappy. And I think there's a very good chance that he loses his position as majority leader. Obviously, I would hope that Shawnee County justice system holds him accountable like they would any other citizen, if indeed he was the one driving that car.
Please give information on why I hear the legislature is enacting measures to take away emergency control from the governor. And if Kansas lifts the mandate, people will die. What can be done to prevent this?
So we just passed the emergency management bill. The days are all blending together at this point. I think earlier this week, but we did. I believe it extends it through September. Looking to the other two for head nods. I'll double check my notes. This was a compromise package. Probably it was described by the ranking Democrat from the House Judiciary Committee as one of the greatest compromises he's seen in the building in his tenure as a legislator. He's been there for a very long time. This was something that the governor urged our votes on. There were parts of it that gave us heartburn. There were parts of it that gave the more conservative Republicans heartburn. So at the end of the day, a compromise, everyone came together and we passed an extension so we can continue to be eligible for the federal resources. As far as the local mask mandates and things like that, I think it's more to come on that. We all know, continue wearing your mask, continue social distancing, take your vaccine when you can get it, and we'll keep going.
Kansas just passed legislation that will lead to transgender teen deaths by excluding those students from sports. Where do you stand on the issue? What can be done to reverse the decision?
I'm really hoping that our House leadership will reject this bill that came over from the Senate. It is the longer we allow this conversation continue, even though I don't believe that this discriminatory policy will become law, it's harmful to Kansans and harmful to transgender children. It's bullying and it is unacceptable.
Yeah, so Senate Bill 208 got read in yesterday. They usually take these controversial bills and they read them in on the House floor when we're all not there. And so the Senate Bill 208, if you don't know, would force women athletes that had their biology, their sex or gender identity challenged, if they wanted to play in women's sports, to undergo a medical exam to prove that they are women. Bullying children is wrong. Bullying trans people or anyone is wrong. This bill is disgusting. I will absolutely be voting no. It was assigned to House Federal and State Affairs. I'm on that committee, so is Representative Hoye. I know we'll be asking the committee chair to not touch the bill. We have heard that the House leadership plans to introduce their own version of the bill, likely modeled after how the Olympics handles this rather than, but my talking points and the folks that I've talked to in my district so far that I've heard from NCAA and the Kansas High School Activities Association already have policies on how to address transgender athletes. There's only 5 in the entire CASA system. This is a solution in search of a problem in search of whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. And it's disgusting to subject women to genital exams to be able to compete in athletics goes against everything that the folks that are bringing this bill, who have been talking about let them play, open everything up. Now they're targeting children because they don't want to pick on someone their own size.
I would echo everything Representative Hoye and Representative Woodard said. The one thing I've been thinking about this since the Senate passed the bill is one of the challenges of being a legislator is you can disagree with the folks you work with pretty strongly, but you have to, get up the next day and come to work and try and work together on things. And that can be hard on issues like Medicaid expansion and taxes and school funding. But just personally, I've been already sort of bracing for, if this should come through the House, watching your colleagues pass a bill that specifically picks on some of the most vulnerable children is a hard thing to come back from. It's a hard thing to watch folks across the aisle vote for something like that and then get up the next day and try and come to work in good faith with them to, fund the government and provide services. So I really, for a lot of reasons, hope that it doesn't get taken up. It's bad policy. It sends a terrible message to students in Kansas. And then just speaking personally as legislators, I don't know what the day after that will be like, and trying to get up and go to work with folks who have specifically chosen to pick on some of the most vulnerable students in Kansas.
Please explain why we would want to give concealed carry rights to someone below the age of 21.
Well, I'm not going to explain why we would want to, because we shouldn't do that. We had a bill for concealed carry reciprocity that passed the House with an amendment on it to lower the concealed carry age to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And the impact with all of our other weakened gun laws and federal laws, we've heard the argument, it's just putting a coat over your gun, which it's not, because a concealed carry permit in Kansas gives you the opportunity to carry that gun where you couldn't carry it currently, such as on the job and into municipal and state buildings like public pools and libraries, parks, and also some into K through 12 schools, because the U.S. Government allows for state issued concealed carry permits to if you carry it into a K through 12 school, it would not be a crime. It could be trespassing, but not a crime. And I think it should be a crime to carry a gun into a K through 12 school. And it also it puts our young Kansans at risk, because they're not old enough to legally purchase a handgun at a federally licensed gun dealer. You have to be 21. So these are going to be through private sales. It's just really not good policy. It expands guns on campus that took place, that went into effect in July of 2017. And they've been trying to get this ever since, to try to expand guns on campus. And it's a dangerous bill, and it puts young Kansans and their families at risk.
Ditto, and I'm very excited that the former chapter leader of the state of Kansas of Moms Demand Action is now Representative JoElla Hoye. We're very lucky to have her in the House.
Can the representative speak to the Senate bill that came over from the chamber this week, Senate Bill 172? Do you think it has a chance to pass the House? The big concern is an overreaching anticipatory piece of legislation cutting into civil rights in search of offenders.
I have to look that up. When we get bill numbers, there's thousands of bills so far already. Let me pull it up real quick.
This is the bill adding crimes for trespassing on critical infrastructure facilities. So in essence, it's an anti-protesting law. I'm very much opposed to this, and this is in response to folks protesting the Keystone Pipeline. This is may seem like a small thing, but honestly seems like a fairly dangerous piece of legislation that tries to dramatically increase the crimes just really for protesting, not even necessarily causing damage to anything. It's brought by the oil and gas industry, I believe. We've seen similar legislation in other states, and I'll be pretty strongly opposed.
Ditto. And just to kind of point so everyone knows too, unless we're on the committees, once bills get read in and go to committees, unless we're on it, we don't usually know what's going on in the other committees, because we're inundated with big projects on our own too. But now hearing what that bill is, a big ol' no from me.
I'll echo that. I didn't know the bill number, but I am familiar with the bill because my office mate, Representative Hasswood, did submit testimony in opposition to it. So I, as the others, do not support that bill.
How is House Bill 2184 coming along? And what about Sunday alcohol sales? Will it be 10 a.m.?
JoElla, if I remember correctly, that was amended to 9 a.m., which 10 a.m. was a compromise between all the different stakeholders. And then Representative Hauser decided that he wants to be able to pick up, I think he stated his bourbon on his way to church. So that was amended to 9 a.m. We'll see what happens. I think that did pass. It passed out of the committee, so we'll see when comes through the whole process. And then also of note too, in a previous bill, the House considered it would also included making law instead of executive order cocktails to go. So the curbside to go was passed by the House. So we'll see where it goes in the Senate.
Yeah, and we did do a growlers bill too in Fenn State. And then as far as HB 2184 goes, we're going to start working that in committee. That's a medical marijuana bill. We're going to start working that on Monday. The chair said it could take 2 or 3 days, which I agree. I think there's really broad support for medical marijuana, but it's going to take a lot of work to get the bill to where everyone's going to agree on it. So it will be a process, but I generally speaking am supportive of it. It's just going to be, how does it end up before I'm saying, yeah, 2184 is the way to go.
Please comment on where you stand on Senate Bill 279, which would stop wind energy development. Thank you.
I am against it.
I am against stopping moves to renewable energy and wind. I don't, as policy, take official positions on bills, especially that come from the Senate, because they're usually poorly written. But once they go through the House process, I always save that official position until I've seen the final version, because what today could be a school funding bill could come out as a school voucher bill tomorrow. And so I oppose moves away from renewable energy, but as far as the final bill, it's probably going to change. So, but I expect I'll probably still be a no.
Definitely in the same position as Representative Woodard on that. And I just quick looked it up and took a look. So that will probably be very different when we get our hands on it in the House.
Real estate values seem to have risen quite dramatically in the last 3 years. The tax portion of my mortgage jumped dramatically this year. What are your thoughts on capping annual increases of residential real estate taxes so that home ownership doesn't become even more unaffordable?
So we worked a bill in House Taxation Committee that came over from the Senate. As again, it was poorly written, so we made a lot of changes. We'll see what they do with our version of the bill. It was a truth and transparency bill. For the most part, your property taxes are decided by your city councilors and your county commissioners. So that's a conversation you would certainly want to have with them about your mill levies. Although the House bill did include truth and taxation, and so that would require annual notices to go out with the breakdown of how all of your property taxes are broken down, where it went to, including the schools and everything else. So we'll see what that conference committee report where they resolve the differences looks like. It also restores local control and it gets rid of the property tax lid, which had unintended consequences, I believe, where because they were afraid of they made different changes where with that local control, it goes back to them, and frankly, they'll have the ability to hear directly from you in their city council and county commission races with that issue. I've knocked 23,000 doors. I've heard people talk about property taxes twice. But I know it's certainly a concern, and it continues to rise here, and we don't want to price people out of being able to live here in Johnson County. So in addition to addressing housing affordability, that truth in taxation bill is one to follow. I believe that's Senate Bill 13.
I just echo what Representative Woodard said, and that PC mentioned on the property tax lid. It might not be a policy that most folks know about, but this was passed before I got elected, where they basically required that if a local government wants to raise their taxes or the mill rate, they have to take it to a vote, which sounds like a good thing to keep those property tax rates lower. But what it amounted to is it made every local government in the state of Kansas terrified to ever lower their rates when they had the opportunity, because it meant if they had a good year and they could lower the rates, they didn't want to lower it, because if next year was bad, then they would have to hold a somewhat expensive election to bring them back up. So it really had a pretty massive unintended consequence of anytime values went up or revenue was better, normally they would have the freedom to go ahead and adjust that and maybe lower the mill rate, but it made them cautious to do it because they knew they would get punished for that if they ever had to change it back up. So hopefully that legislation completes the process, because while I think it was a well-intended effort to keep taxes down, it really ultimately ended up in doing the opposite.
Yeah, I was really glad to see that bill. I had removing the property tax lid as one of my campaign issues, because as a former senior analyst in Johnson County Manager's office, I've been able to see how the flexibility is really important. And as our assessed valuations go up, as we see our property values go up, we can edge the mill levy, our tax rate down a little bit, because to keep our revenues the same. And I imagine even in the smaller, more rural communities, this is going to even have a greater impact. So I'm really glad that we're able to get that through, and they still have some details to work out on it. But I was glad to see so much bipartisan support for giving that control back to local governments.
Is the redistricting committee meeting?
I don't believe they've had a meeting yet. For those who followed this, that they require basically the census data to come in from the federal government, which has been pushed back a couple of times now. And so the really actionable information where they can dig in and start putting together maps won't come, I think, until September now. We usually are done for the year in May. That said, there's the opportunity for committees to meet on an interim basis between sessions. So my guess would be leading up to that information coming in, and after it, that committee would meet a bit in the off season, but really the bulk of the work will be done next January and beyond.
With the hyper-partisan nature of national politics, how partisan do you feel Kansas state politics are? Do you all have to try and make friendships with members from the Republican Party in Kansas? What are some issues Democrats and Republicans in Kansas can compromise on and pass good legislation?
I'll start in as the freshman of the bunch and just mention that, yes, absolutely. When we come in, we want to meet everybody and find commonalities. I will add that the pandemic has made that much more difficult for everyone to be able to meet one another and mingle and develop those relationships. We jumped right in with the session with something really controversial and a big constitutional amendment, and it has been a very fast moving, wild session. So while I've had some of those conversations and opportunities, I feel like once we're on the other side of the pandemic, that is going to be a big improvement. And I even met with a a more seasoned Republican lawmaker who said he didn't even really know any of their freshmen yet. So that has made this session, I feel, more difficult. But most of the bills that we've passed have been pretty overwhelmingly bipartisan. And there are few issues that'll get everybody's buttons pushed. And as Representative Parker mentioned earlier, when it comes to bills that are discriminatory, it's really hard to see past that and want to ever, sign on to a bill with somebody who believes that. So we still have issues to overcome, but for the most part, the Republicans, Democrats have all been really supportive and helpful, to me as a freshman lawmaker.
I would echo a lot of that. I mean, I've definitely noticed that because of the pandemic, a lot of the normal evening receptions, gatherings in the State House, advocacy days, all those sorts of things that bring together folks that normally wouldn't, if you're not on committee with them or whatever else, you wouldn't be really connecting with them. A lot of that is come to a halt. Now a little bit of that is starting to happen as people are vaccinated and things like that, but it's tough. And so I have to remind myself, though, that I owe it to the people of my district. Of course, my whole job, if I wanted it to be just that, is to show up in Topeka and to vote yes or no. That is our job. That's all we can do at the most fundamental level. Beyond that, I'm a member of the minority party. There are 38 of us. That doesn't equal 63. So in order for us to pass proactive policy, we've got to go make friends. We've got to build relationships with folks to get to that majority. After the last election, our governing majority isn't really at 63 right now with the moderate Republicans. And so we've really got to work hard to build coalitions with folks. And there's been several times this year where, frankly, we were up in the gallery. We've been split up and about half of the House was in the gallery. We were seated by some of the most social conservatives. And because of those relationships, found ourselves oftentimes voting with them, which was interesting. And so strange bedfellows sometimes, but I think a lot of that comes down to who you spend time with and really get to know. There's two members that I know I will never agree with them on probably any issue ever, but I can get them to talk about their kids and then they open up and then we can find dialogue to find where we connect.
Yeah, I would just support everything that Representative Hoye and Woodard said. Those relationships are really crucial. It's tougher this year. As members of the minority party, what we aspire to do is not to pass everything we believe in. We just want to be able to have the opportunity to pass things that there are consensus around. And sometimes that can be frustrating. I think one thing to keep in mind too is that the structure of the Kansas House and Senate really lends itself to partisanship. You have a lot of power concentrated in the Senate president and the Speaker of the House. And sometimes those folks have different views than a majority of the legislators, or sometimes they have different ambitions, right? Most of us who are members of the House or Senate, this is a unique thing that we did, but we're not doing it so that we can run for Congress or governor at some point. Generally, if you've made it to the point of being Speaker of the House or Senate president, you're looking at higher offices. And so sometimes you have what happens in the House or the Senate shaped by the next ambitions of the people occupying those offices. Those folks have the power to appoint or revoke committee chairmanships, so they have a lot of influence over the majority party. And so one of the frustrating things is you can do all the work, you can get to know folks, you can find common ground, find things that you can, have a majority of legislators who actually believe in passing the policy. And then when the votes go up, you lose some of the members of the majority party because the Speaker and the Senate president have so much influence. They can take people off of their committees, they can take away their positions of leadership, they can recruit and recruit primary opponents and find outside organizations to fund campaigns against folks. And that's really disheartening, especially when you connect with people you don't have a lot in common with. You find that common ground and you want to be able to support legislation together. And then you see a few people with a heavy concentration of power really able to disrupt that.
Why does the state of Kansas not have a unified way to register for COVID-19 vaccinations that works? Why do people have to register at multiple locations and keep checking?
I will jump in. That's a great question. It's something we can certainly pass on to KDHE. So email any of us and we can get that answer from you. The state's role is to get the vaccine directly to the 300 plus vaccination sites. Between the time that they get it from the federal government, it's 23 hours until it's being delivered. At issue is that we're distributing it to our counties and the health departments. What I know that Johnson County is experiencing right now, as well as the health clinics, is that so many people did sign up for everything and now they're not showing up to appointments. And so they're finding themselves frantically calling people because they've thought out the vaccine and they've got to find people to get shots in arms. And so in the immediate term, if you're looking for a vaccine, call those places, get on their backup list, because there's a huge number of no-show appointments right now, and they have to get that vaccine in the arm as quickly as possible. As far as the statewide plan, we can certainly submit that to the Secretary of KDHE and make sure that they've done that. There is the kansasvaccine.gov website, and from there, I think there's a vaccine finder as well. I have not checked it out, but that would certainly be a good place to start.
Yeah, everything Representative Woodard said is spot on. The other thing that I would add too is, while our nation did an amazing job developing the vaccine and having it ready to roll out when it did, our cities and counties and even our states were really under the assumption that the federal government was ramping up for a well-run vaccine distribution process. And what ultimately happened is it started rolling out, and they basically told the state and local governments, here it is, do something with it. And so that lack of communication from the federal government last fall really, I think, hindered the ability to have a smooth rollout immediately. And our health departments at the county levels and at the state level have been scrambling to get caught up with that and to make sure that there is an effective way for people to get signed up. It's frustrating. It's not how any of us would have wanted to go down. Thankfully, now we're at least getting to a point where production isn't nearly as much of an issue. We're rolling it out. At the beginning, we had some of those problems, but really the issue was just not getting enough vaccine to every county in Kansas. We're now at a point where it's being rolled out fast enough that folks are aware that they can, hopefully get signed up soon. But I agree with Representative Woodard. I would direct folks to that the statewide vaccine site, but there's no precedence for this, I guess. So I do give a little bit of grace for the people in those roles that they were basically had a ton of bricks dropped on their shoulders and have been scrambling to get everything set up as best they can. I think, God forbid, if we were to do this again in a couple of years, we'd have all the benefit of having been through it. But this is a first-time experience for a lot of the folks in those positions.
Medicaid win.
I'm assuming that's referencing Medicaid expansion. This has been, we could have done this since 2014. Kansas has given up literally billions of dollars, including dollars you've paid to the federal government in your taxes. I've voted on this more times now than I can remember. We've passed it through the House a couple of times in my 5 years. The Senate has always, well, I guess my first year, the Senate did pass it and Governor Brownback vetoed it, and there weren't enough votes to override. The votes for Medicaid expansion are razor thin right now. When I first got elected and started in 2017, we nearly had 2/3 majorities, bipartisan in both chambers to support it. We almost overrode Governor Brownback's vetoes. Now you have to get to some really iffy swing votes to get to 63 votes in the House and 21 in the Senate. It's possible. Again, though, that this comes back to some of those power structures. The folks who would be those deciding votes are kind of iffy on the issue, and they're definitely iffy when the Senate president or the Speaker of the House has, made it pretty clear that a yes vote for Medicaid expansion won't be tolerated. We're going to keep trying. There are opportunities to cast those votes. The challenge is when you don't get to run it through committee and run it through the normal process, you have to offer the policy as an amendment to other things, or sort of buck normal procedure. And those are some of the most difficult votes for the majority party members to make, because it's really seen as kind of an affront to their party leadership if they amend something in a surprise way, if they buck the rules committee or rules chair on what is amendable. But those are really the only avenues that have been left to us. It's also, I know I said this before, but it's imperative that we do this now. It's been a great policy for us to adopt for years, but the last relief bill passed by the federal government incentivizes states that haven't passed expansion yet to go ahead and do it. And the most recent estimates are that for Kansas, that would bring in over $400 million extra in revenue for us over 2 years. That's money that could go towards investing in higher education, towards extra to paying for the limited cost of Medicaid expansion for 8 years. It could go towards anything that we need it to go towards. So we will keep fighting for that. It's an uphill battle. The votes will be close if you get everyone who believes in it to vote for it. One of the biggest challenges is getting everyone who believes in it to vote for it, given the political consequences that face some of our Republican colleagues when they cast that vote.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think too, I had someone, I live tweet everything we do in the House. And so if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'll update you while we're on the floor. But I've had several people be like, why don't you all just run a Medicaid expansion amendment? And I think it's important to remember that, one, the votes are incredibly close, and two, we used a procedural move in 2019 to force this to the floor using something that had not been successfully accomplished in over 20 years. And it took 6 weeks of planning. It wasn't just, oh, let's pass Medicaid expansion today. It took 6 weeks of behind the scenes planning, coordinating every single detail, from the chairs who could lose their chairmanship stepping out of the room during the vote to drop the number of votes that we needed to override the leadership. Every single part of that was taken into account. And then unfortunately, the Senate didn't pass it. And so we lost several of our expansion voters. And so it's going to be, as Brett said, the conversations are still happening. They're not public because we've got to make sure that when it gets to the floor, it gets to the floor and it passes. But we're going to have to keep working, but would echo all the important reasons why we hear all the time in that building about mental health, about the need for increasing reimbursement rates. Medicaid expansion does that. And surprise, it's incredibly good for Johnson County. And so it's something that we really need to lean in on our current swing votes or no votes about the importance of what this could do for Kansas.
The only thing I really have to add on these two really good points made by the previous representatives is that the topic of Medicaid expansion comes up frequently, and I'm on children and seniors, and it's come up in K through 12 budget when we were discussing mental health intervention programs, and children and seniors when we were discussing autism programs. And the advocates and the folks who come in and testify, when they're asked and how much this really would help, it really is surprising how many votes we still need, because it is a frequent discussion in that building, and over again we hear how much we need it and how much it would help Kansans. So I'm glad the discussions are still happening, and we need Medicaid expansion now more than ever.
Okay. In your view, what are the 2 to 3 areas where voters need to be more informed? Are there any issues that lack transparency that create barriers to becoming more informed in those areas?
I'll start. This probably doesn't apply to any of you because you're on this call, right? You are here, you're engaging with your elected officials. I think the biggest thing that I hear from constituents, because they have my cell phone number and my personal email address, are on every single campaign piece of literature that was left at their door, that was in their mail. And so I hear all the time from folks, usually about potholes, which should go to their city councilor, their property tax rates, which needs to be addressed by their county commissioner. And so I think generally for the public, we want to do as much as we can to make sure that they understand all the different levels of government. I think a lot of times folks, especially younger voters, get distracted by who's in the White House when the decisions that are made that impact their day-to-day life are legislative level, city council, school board, all of that sort of stuff. So making sure folks are engaged. But I think the barriers are that the Kansas legislative website is a great tool, and it has every single piece of information you could possibly ever need or want to find. The problem is that it's not the easiest website to navigate. And so if you ever have questions, reach out to us to help you kind of sort out where the bill is, how it was voted on, things like that. But just generally also just keep reaching out, making sure that your elected officials at every level know who you are, what you care about, the issues that are important to you. I'm going to call out Jerry on here because I know that he always is, he's very passionate about the Criminal Justice Reform Commission and the work that we're doing there. And I know that when I see his name pop up, I'm like, ooh, we've got a project to work on. Make sure that you are continuing to be present. If your legislator agrees with you or not, make sure that they continue to hear from you. It's not really a barrier, I guess, but just hold their feet to the fire and keep up with as much as you can.
I think it's also really important to understand at this level of government with your state representatives, it's us reading our emails, us answering the phone a lot of the time. And, you know, it goes a long way with if you're representative, either side, either party, we're pretty regular people and want to get back to you as soon as possible. And so coming at somebody, you know, from a place of kindness and respect really goes a long way because after a rough day or a long day and you come in and get your emails and read through them, I tend to skip over the rude ones first. So I don't want to say like we don't deserve what we get sometimes, but starting at the level of, hey, we're neighbors, we live close to one another. These districts are in our house are not very big, and coming at it from a place of there's probably stuff we agree on is going to be the best way to move the needle on your issue or get a response. Because for the most part, most representatives there, I believe, really care about their constituents, even if you don't agree on everything.
I agree with everything that's been said thus far. I think maybe the thing that I would stress, and this is something that's sunk in more and more each year, is that good governance is a lot more than what fits on a postcard or a nice political talking point. And I think it's become one of my biggest pet peeves over the years is that sometimes the loudest, angriest, or most complaining voices in government are the ones that are heard. But it takes a lot of work to make these things run and to provide reliable services for Kansans. And so the loudest voice might be decrying problems at the Department of Labor, and you'll see that on their postcards the next time that they run for office. But what you won't see is that they voted to defund it, or that they, you know, decided to do away with the last modernization effort and all of the really hard work that goes into building and sustaining government. And I think you've got in Representative Woodard and Representative Hoye, two great examples of representatives who are members of their community, who have stepped up, who are doing that hard work of governing. They're not going to be the loudest ones out there. But you know that they're going to take your concerns seriously, whether or not they, you know, agree with you on everything. And no matter which party it is that you tend to support or who's running in your district, I would just encourage everyone, and as Representative Woodard said, you all on this call are probably far ahead on this, but find the people who are going to do that work, who are going to take it seriously, who aren't going to change their position tomorrow because it now sounds better as a loud talking point or a way to get their name in the newspaper. Making Kansas work for everyone is a long-term project, and we need people who are serious about doing that work.
All right. As usual, we have more questions than we do time. So I'm going to send out an email to all of the registrants with information about how to contact the legislators that are speaking today, as well as any legislator in the Kansas House or Senate. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time out on your Saturday morning. I know it's beautiful outside. You could be doing a lot of other things besides sitting in front of your computer yet again. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. And thank you to all of our legislators also for giving up your Saturday morning on a beautiful day. We appreciate it. Thank you. Michelle, how do I stop recording? I don't see it. Oh,